Hi everyone, my name is Allison Leslie, and today I'm going to be talking about teasing and bullying. I'm going to be kind of using the Kowalski article, so unless they say differently, everything is from Kowalski. All right, so these are our objectives for today, kind of what we're going to be going through. First, we're going to define teasing and bullying. We're going to explain how the two are similar and different, explore why people tease and bully, talk about the three conceptual analyses of teasing, explain the characteristics between victims and perpetrators, explore who is being bullied. We're going to be talking about consequences for victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. And then lastly, we'll be kind of exploring social media and bullying. So first things first, we have to define what we're going to be talking about. Bullying is defined as a subset of aggressive behavior that has potential to cause physical or physiological harm to the recipient. And then teasing, on the other hand, is a personal communication directed by an agent to a target that includes four components: aggression, humor, ambiguity, and identity confrontation. And you can kind of see I have in quotes there proactive teasing and pro-social teasing. So I'll kind of dive into what those mean now. Proactive teasing is teasing with malicious intent, which is kind of why it falls in with bullying. It's a little more serious. And on the flip side, pro-social teasing is teasing that's, typically done between friends to kind of test those barriers between friendship, just kind of lighthearted, almost flirting, that kind of teasing where it's just a lot more lighthearted and not as malicious as bullying. So kind of to go into further detail about the difference between teasing and bullying, I really love how Kowalski broke this down about the power difference or the perceived power difference between bullies and the victims. So with bullying, there's typically the bully has a high perception of power of themselves, and the victim, according to the bully, has a low perception of power. So an example I kind of came up with is going to be between Timmy and Johnny. So Timmy is our perpetrator. He thinks of himself as better than Johnny, who is our victim, because he's taller and he's faster. Timmy is under the impression that he has more power than Johnny, and therefore the messages that Timmy sends are hurtful due to the perceived power that he has over Johnny. I know it's kind of an immature example, but a lot of our kids that are being bullied or are bullies are just that, they're children. We see that a lot. So that's what I was kind of that mentality when I was coming up with this example. Obviously Johnny would know that he has, he has like a physical difference between Timmy, who is obviously bigger than him. So he might, be more prone to that bullying just because, he's experienced it before. On the flip side, teasing is an equal perception of power. So if two classmates are seen as equals and the two are acting in conversation, it might be seen as teasing. So an example of this is Rose and Claire. They've been great friends for years. And Rose always pokes fun at the fact that Claire puts ranch on her pizza. Claire always laughs it off. And then the two see each other as equals because they're in a friendship and they know each other, they trust each other, and they do tease each other. So therefore, this is lighthearted teasing. All right. So some similarities between teasing and bullying. Both teasing and bullying are primary modes of peer victimization, aggressive actions instigated against one's peers. Also, both have elements of humor, although not always funny for the victim. They are both models of peer victimization, but like I kind of mentioned, that teasing is a lot more, kind of friendly or maybe more flirtatious and testing those boundaries of that friendship. Whereas bullying, there is a lot more of a malicious intent, just doing it to be mean. So that's where like the differentiation and the similarities come into play. So why people tease and bullying? So I know when we were all little or maybe in middle school, multiple people I'm sure have told us they're bullying you because they're jealous of you, or he's being mean to you because he likes you and this is his way of showing it. When actually people who bully have a threatened egotism, meaning individuals have inflated views of their own worth and abilities, and then they aggress when those abilities and worth are threatened. So an example of this, and when I was reading Kowalski's article, I was like, oh, it clicked, it all makes sense. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I tried out for the varsity volleyball team and I made it. And I actually took the starting spot of a senior who had been there for a few years now, and she was, basically counting on starting. I kind of took that spot, and I think it was rightfully so. The coach thought it was rightfully so as well. But when I did take her spot, a lot of rumors started about me. A lot of bullying started from her to me, and it was because she had that threatened egotism, and she felt threatened that I was, taking her spot and I was threatening her ability, within the court. So I just thought that was pretty interesting and it kind of clicked for me. And I just thought it was very interesting. All right, so this brings us to our conceptual analysis of teasing. I have three of them. So the first is appraisal, stress, and coping. This model starts out with the fact that they're assuming that the teasing is cruel and a potential stressor. So this model kind of looks at the, um, oh, this looks at the post. This is like a post teasing episode, I guess. This you'd look back on it. So you have to. This is after the uh, attempt or the teasing has already happened. So your primary appraisal is when you evaluate the degree of the threat posed by the teasing episode. So you look back and find if there was a threat, and if little or no threat was detected, then the appraisal stops. You just leave it at that. But if there is a threat detected, then a secondary appraisal starts, and the process occurs in which the target evaluates their resources with coping for the tease. And I will kind of, explain coping in just a minute. But where this model lacks is there is ambiguity in personal experiences. So my thought is, how does a 6-year-old know when to stop that appraisal? You know what I mean? If they don't have that social support or they don't have that support of someone saying, hey, that's wrong, where do they know when it stops? And that's just an interesting question that I kind of thought of. And also, two people can experience the same event and perceive it very differently. So if I'm 4 years old or 5 years old coming home to my mom saying I got bullied, and my mom had a similar experience and says suck it up, like it just, it kind of throws you for a loop there, which is where coping and positive coping kind of comes in hand. And this is where I'll kind of explain that. So emotion focused coping is crying or appearing anxious, and this is what a lot of victims do to cope with the trauma. It's kind of a natural instinct to want to just kind of break down, and so those who enact in emotion focused coping typically experience repeated victimization because they are seen as easy prey. If your line of defense is just to break down and cry and get small and just, I don't know, almost give up, bullies really dig into that, and they really kind of go for you even harder, is what Kowalski found. So the coping skill or the coping set that he recommends is problem focused coping. So that is either confronting the teaser or seeking social support, and that can help alleviate that stress from being teased and bullied, and also really practice some really good coping skills, not just for bullying, for so many other things that we have to deal with in life. All right, so the next one is face threat. And this model kind of talks about how we as humans want to save face. We want to look good in front of other people. And so when someone is teasing or bullying us, we don't look good in front of that person. We don't look good, we want to be liked. So the teasing is threatening to us, because, we don't want other people to think our character is something that it's not. And so I just think that was really interesting. And this model does lack, though, because it doesn't consider prior feelings to the perpetrator, victim, or observer. So I just found that very interesting as well. And then last but not least is the social interactionist model. This model allows us to identify those key variables involved to kind of predict teasing episodes. So variables such as relating to one another, history of relating, current affective state, and the nature of the relationship between the two. I think this model is, one of the best. I think it might be my favorite, just because of the ability to consider the social background of the situation. One thing I found really interesting is, if this is a ongoing saga between a bully and a victim that's been going on for years, people don't really expect it, and you might hear about the background, and it might not be as juicy. But if it's a couple that just broke up and now they're hardcore bullying each other and just making life miserable for each other, that's a little bit more interesting, because you have to talk about that, their history of relating and their current affective state. It's so much more comprehensive, and I think this is why it's my favorite model. But moving on, we have to talk about who is getting bullied. So this might not shock anybody. I know it definitely didn't shock me. It's 6th through 8th graders are the most bullied group. I know we can probably all look back and just remember being, picked on, or just having a tough time in middle school. Middle school is a really tough time because of all those changes. It's also a time where a lot of children shift either into really high self-esteem or really low self-esteem. So it's just really interesting, just because, like we talked about earlier, with those perceived power differences, that's where a lot of bullying really just takes off and becomes a real issue. And as I mentioned before, repeated victims usually get bullied the most because of their perceived vulnerability. So when they do have that lower self-esteem or that lower perceived value or power, it can really be an issue. And it'll, usually there are multiple victims. So there are consequences for everybody involved, not just the perpetrator and the victim, but also the observer. So for the perpetrator, possible future criminal activity, Kowalski says, substance abuse issues, and possible relational issues. And that totally makes sense if you think about it, because if you are someone who has bullied your entire life, you've spent all of your 18 years of high school, middle school, and elementary school bullying people, and then you go into the workforce or you go into real life and you try to have relationships with people, and you're using the same tactics that you've learned your entire life and that you've gotten away with your entire life, you're going to have relational issues, which can stem to substance abuse issues and possible future criminal activity. It's just a really bad cycle. And so it's not only dangerous for victims and observers, but also perpetrators. They have to learn that this is not okay behavior and that it is really aversive behavior. So the victim, some consequences. Obviously, this shouldn't shock anybody. Possible mental health issues, lack of trust, or not willing to disclose as openly. Excuse me, and also social problems, which should not shock anyone. Like I said, the trauma that a lot of us go through can be really damaging. And these are ways to kind of protect ourselves. There's a lot of people who have been hurt through bullying, and so maybe they don't disclose as easily or open up, and maybe they have a hard time approaching people for fear that they will be bullied again. And then one that I didn't really think about, but makes total sense now that I've read this article, is that the observer definitely has consequences. So possible feelings of guilt, feeling scared about being the next victim, not wanting to lose friends, and not wanting to lose them because they aren't intervening in the bullying. So that really, kind of struck a nerve for me when Kowalski was talking about that, because basically, they're kind of stuck in the middle, the observer is, where they don't want to be the next victim. They don't want to go through what they're watching, but at the same time, if that's their friend being bullied, they don't want to sit there and watch them and, seem like they're a bad friend. So it's just a really sticky situation, and that's where that deep guilt that a lot of observers feel comes into play. So one of the most interesting parts that I found is that Kowalski in the early 2000s talks about social media and online bullying. So, now that we're in 2022 and we all have our phones, with us all the time, and we get notifications from social medias constantly, I know I do at least, it's so much easier to bully behind a screen. Kowalski talks about how girls who are typically less confrontational are more likely to make fun, cast out, and harass other students online. This form of bullying is so dangerous because there's no escape, there's no safe ground. Unlike confrontational bullying, where it happens maybe at school or on the bus or something like that, it stops when you get home. Social media bullying, on the other hand, you take it with you everywhere. And there's really no escape from it, which can be incredibly dangerous. And also, it's a sticky spot for schools and authorities, even because a lot of schools definitely can't do anything about this type of bullying because there was no physical issue on school property. And another thing that's really interesting is the fact that there are so many, you could totally hide behind a completely different username. If you're a 12-year-old girl, you can say you're some 65-year-old man on Instagram, or whatever. I just think it's really interesting, and it's just a really sticky situation, and it honestly scares me for our kids right now, in those middle school phases where technology can be a blessing and a curse, absolutely, for sure. Alrighty, so this brings me to my reference. This is my last slide. Thank you all so much for listening, and I cannot wait to talk about this on Tuesday with you all. Thank you.